the same block where we had stolen liquor by the bus stop. Took a while, now you're called an alcoholic.
Welcome to the Age of Jeremy, episode 1. It is October 12th, 2017, and I'm recording this in my home studio, really just a bedroom with a desk and a couple of monitors, a speaker, and a blue microphone because my other microphone and my other equipment is at a different studio that we do some podcasting at for Age of Radio. But I'm coming at you at my home studio, which means that you're probably going to hear Furiosa, my amazing hamster, doing some tricks in the background. So if you hear some wheel running, that is my hamster Furiosa. And yes, Furiosa is from Mad Max Fury Road. So Fury, Furry, So what I wanted to talk to you about in this episode was a little bit about what Age of Jeremy is, what Age of Radio is, and how I really got to own Age of Radio and how I got to start Age of Jeremy. And it starts with my production that I started doing for a podcast called JV Impacts Podcast. And I'm not going to talk too much about that, but essentially going through and learning how to do podcast production for JV Impacts, I started researching and learning about how podcast networks work. And essentially, the great thing about podcast networks is it's a great distribution channel for podcasts because the podcasts can, I guess, kind of promote each other and share each others' work in the podcast. So that essentially, so for instance, the podcast that Age of Radio does right now is for JV Impacts. And JV Impacts is a motivational company that focuses on motivation, health, and life. And in the podcast, they create John Vasquez, that's what JV stands for. John Vasquez creates these really great 15-minute podcasts that focus on motivation, health, and life. So for instance, on Mondays, JV Impacts has Motivation Monday. On Tuesdays, they do Health Tuesday topics. On Wednesdays, they do Hump Day Wednesday to get you over that hump. Thursdays, they do Life Lesson Thursdays. And Friday, John Vasquez does Fired Up Fridays. So he does the podcast and then he sends them to me and I kind of clean them up. And so, for instance, my allergies are bad right now. So I'm breathing heavy and those breaths are going to pick up in the podcast and I'm going to do everything that I can to take them out, to clean it up so it sounds really polished. And that's what Age of Radio does as a production company. But what I'm doing right now is the benefit of having a podcast network. So the Age of Jeremy podcast will be on the Age of Radio podcast network. So we'll be able to advertise each other's podcasts. And that gets our podcast in front of other people. Hopefully those people start listening to the other people's podcasts, and that's how they grow. So I think two of the most popular podcast networks that are three that I can think of off the top of my head are Nerdist, Earwolf, and Gimlet. And so those are three of the top podcast networks, and they have lots of great shows. So when I started to learn about podcast networks and how the distribution works with each of them, I thought that would be really cool to create different shows or find different people to create shows that I can do the podcasts for. And maybe not all of the production for the podcast, but at least host it on the network and then help those people find ad revenue. And over time, and it takes a lot of time, but as podcasts grow, they can start advertising for ads. So you get what's called ad inventory. So ad inventory is the available space on a show, in this case a podcast, that is available to sell to companies so you can advertise their products. And so that's one of the main things that's got me started on Age of Radio. But then it really opened up a whole host of other concepts and other thoughts. One of the main things that I started noticing is podcasts are really in their infancy, even though they've been around for a really long time. I mean, they're really just a radio show that's recorded and played through a different device like a computer or a phone. And so since it's in its infancy, it's still trying to figure out what kind of key performance indicators can go really well with it, how we really measure success with a podcast, how we can show that success to marketing company or to companies so that they can market their products through the podcast. And then it also opens up a lot of great ideas for companies to create a podcast to give content to people. And so that's kind of where I'm at with Age of Radio. That's kind of what got me really interested in Age of Radio is how can I find other people to do shows? How can I make money off of it? And how can I grow it? As I started thinking about it, I started coming up with an idea that this is a great way for people to share their voice no matter who it is. And I have a great backstory, and you, the listener, is going to have a great backstory. You may not see it as you're living it, but if you write down the story that's going on with your life and you present it to the world, it's going to be a great story, and a lot of people may like it. And I think that podcasting is a great way to get those messages to the world. And what's great about it is a lot of it can be free or really inexpensive to get going with podcasting. And that's what I hope that Age of Radio can do. That's one of the first things. The other thing that I hope that it can do is it can create a new way to look at how to measure success from a podcast and really take podcasting from an infancy, create better analytics for it so that we can measure that success and grow podcasts differently and find new ways to make revenue with them. And so that's one of the other things that I want to do with Age of Radio. Then what I started looking at was I think we can do a better way of hosting it. So I would like to see Age of Radio become a hosting company. And what I mean by that is you have to host the podcast somewhere on the internet. You can either do self-hosting or you can use a company like we use Libsyn for the JV Impacts podcast. So you could use Libsyn, you upload the podcast to it. It creates a URL for your RSS feed. And then that RSS feed you put into into iTunes or into Android. And then that's what allows the iTunes or the Android or Stitcher to get the podcast every time you publish a new episode. So there's a lot of great ideas that I have with Age of Radio, but I really wanted to dive deep and see what I could do within podcasting. I think voice is great. I've always been involved with music my whole life. I play the guitar. That's my main instrument. I love writing songs, but I'm not a great singer, but I enjoy singing. But I've always been intrigued by voice and by sound and the amazing stuff that we can do with sound and how it can show our emotions, how it can show when we're happy, how it can show what happens when we're sad. And that intrigues me because this is all voice. This is all talking. This is all radio. This is a new age of radio. And that's one of the reasons why I came up with the name Age of Radio is because these things are always changing and we're always finding new ways to get content out to the world. And podcasting is not just the new radio. I think it can be something else. And like I said, I believe that it's in its infancy, and I believe there's a lot that we can learn to do with this medium and to do with this distribution channel. And that's what I want to do. But to get better at it, I need to be podcasting more and seeing what we can come up with, what kind of shows we can come up with, what we can do with it. And that's why I created Age of Jeremy. So I could talk a little bit about what I'm learning, what I'm going through, how I'm building my businesses, how I'm helping with JV Impacts, and how I'm growing the Age of Jeremy brand, how I'm growing the Age of Radio brand, and how I'm working on that website. So that's what I want this podcast to really be about. And when I was thinking about that, I came up with some really cool ideas for segments. And the first segment that I want to do on the show that's going to start it off is a segment about podcasts, which makes sense. To me, it makes sense. I don't know if it makes sense to you. If it doesn't make sense to you, leave me a comment and I'll take the feedback and see what I can figure out. And with what I mean by a segment of podcasts, so I really want to start an Age of Radio podcast award show. And I don't know how long it's going to take to do that before it's a big thing. There's no actual written down strategy for it yet, which is something that I'm learning as I create more businesses and do more business adventures, is I sometimes feel that I go into them, I start working on them, and I don't have the business plan written out like I should have. And that's just because my personality is I get really excited about stuff. I start going at it, and then I kind of have forgot to plan. And then when things blow up in my face or they don't work out, I'm like, oh, well, why did this happen? Well, it happened because I didn't fucking plan it in the first place. So, but I know how I want to start this podcast show. Or a podcast award show. And that's with this podcast. So the first segment that I want to have is I want to introduce to the audience, to you, the listeners, about different podcasts that I'm interested in. So for example, one that I'm interested in right now that I think is great that I want to share with people because it's fantastic is Coffee with Butterscotch. And it's a podcast from a company called Butterscotch Shenanigans. They make a great game game app on your phone. It's called Crashlands, and it's had great success. But they come every week and they do a podcast called Coffee with Butterscotch. And the Coffee with Butterscotch group, it's not on Age of Radio Network or anything like that. It's completely something completely different. But they talk about all the stuff that they're going through, that they're learning as they're building a game development company. And the three guys that do the podcast, they're all brothers. And it's just a great story. And if you research more, they just have a great story behind them. And it's a fun podcast. So for instance, that's a podcast that I like. And I would bring that to you. I would talk to you about it, kind of like just what I did, maybe more in depth. And then I would play a clip of it so you can kind of hear it. And because I'm only going to do this podcast twice a month or every 2 weeks, but I want there to be 4 podcasts that I tell you about. So 1 for each week of the month, essentially. I would do 2 during one podcast. But what's great about it is I want you guys to vote for it. Because again, I really want to turn it into an award show and I want lots of engagement. And so I created a group called the Age of Radio Heads group. And you can find that through the Facebook page, Age of Radio. And in that Age of Radio Heads, after I get the 4 that I want to do for that month, I'll put up a poll and you guys can go in there and vote. And if none of you vote, that's great. I'll just vote and I'll just say that they won it. And when they win it, I'm going to get a silver microphone trophy made for that podcast. And then I'm going to send it to them with a little card that explains what it is. And this is 2 things. One, I think it's going to be a great way to spread the Age of Radio name and the Age of Jeremy name. Because every month I'm going to be sending a cool little microphone trophy to a company that says, hey, you won this show. And they're going to be like, what is Age of Radio? What is Age of Jeremy? And they're going to go and they're going to look it up. And they're going to be like, oh, this is really cool. This is a podcast network. And maybe if I'm lucky, some of them will reach out to me and be like, hey, how can we be involved with your podcast network? And then I'll tell them, and hopefully I'll have it all planned out and ready, which I probably won't, but let's say I did. I'll have it all ready and I can tell them how I'm going to help them make money and how I'm going to help them distribute their podcast and how we're going to advertise their podcast. But that's why the award show would work. The other thing is not only will it spread the Age of Radio name, but in the process, I would be creating an award show. And hopefully some point in time, this is going to grow big enough. But this is in its infancy, and I'm really learning how this works, and I want to share that with everybody. But I think there's a lot of podcasts out there. I mean, there's a lot of podcasts out there, and it's difficult to sift through them. So a lot of times at work, I'll be listening to a podcast while I'm working. I'll research lots of different podcasts because I want to be that good at understanding podcasts. Like, I want people, when they think of Jeremy, oh my gosh, he is the podcast god. He's the podcast king. He's going to, if I want to create a podcast, I'm going to reach out to him. And the great news is you can reach out to me because that's what Age of Radio is. It's a way for you to have someone to help you share your voice and help you create a podcast. Maybe you have an idea for a show, but you don't know how to get started. You can reach out to me through our Age of Radio Heads group page or through the Age of Radio's Facebook page, and I'll help you get it going. And of course, there's going to be you're not going to pay me outright, but we're going to come up with a tier system for how you can join the network, how we're going to share the ad revenue. And it may not be a lot. Maybe we only get you $50 a month and I only take like $5. I don't know yet, but that's what this podcast is about. Me growing this sharing my ideas with you, getting ideas from you, and us working as a community. So that's the first segment, is the podcast award show, and what podcast I think you guys should vote for the best podcast for that month. And then at the end of the year, we'll do a year podcast, and I'll get a gold-plated, not real gold, but a gold-plated microphone trophy, and that will be the winner of the year. And to be honest, I think that's kind of cool. I think it's kind of fun. Maybe someone does this now. I don't know. Maybe you're listening to this show right now and you do that. Leave me a comment. That would be great. So I can learn from you, and maybe we can join forces and work together. So that's the first segment. Second segment is I'm building businesses, and I'm learning about a lot of stuff with JV Impacts, and I'm learning a lot of stuff through Age of Radio and my regular job. As I'm learning all this, I'm starting to fall more in love with social media. And there's so much great stuff about social media. There's so much great stuff about social media marketing that I want to share it with you. I want to share with you what I'm doing. I want to learn from you. I want to give you the ideas that I have. And so I'm going to have a social media segment. I can't give you an exact example of what that would sound like yet, but on the next podcast, I will have an actual segment where I talk about something with social media, maybe talk to you about a great tool that you can use with social media, how to maybe do something better on Instagram, how to maybe do something better with Facebook, maybe talk to you about musical.ly, which is right now my favorite social media platform because it has to do with music, and I love music. And then I just came across Flipagram, which is a fantastic tool to help make your Instagram posts come to life. I think it's great. And then hopefully some of these techniques will help you build your Instagram. If not, I'm going to have fun talking about it and have fun learning about new stuff that I can share with you. So that's going to be the second segment. So the first segment of the show, you're going to have the podcast awards, then you're going to have social media talk. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about business and what I'm doing. I don't want to go just because for branding reasons and things of that nature. I do a lot of stuff with JV Impacts now, and it's mainly with the podcast and getting him on the network, John Vasquez on the network. But he does have a lot of stuff that he does that I do help JV Impacts with. And so like one of those things that I'm helping with is working on the web page. So it's led me into this great path of learning about HTML and CSS. And it was great. I started studying HTML probably about, I want to say, a year ago. And real quick too, I just noticed I'm doing this. I'm swinging in my chair while I talk to you. So the voice might come in and out. So when I go back and listen to it, I'll be able to hear it, and I'll give you a update on that next podcast. But so I apologize if that's happening. I'll try to sit still. But I've been learning about HTML and CSS so I can learn how to, because I want more control over creating the website, not only for helping JV Impacts, but also for helping Age of Radio and getting the Age of Radio website great. Because I really want it to be a fun user experience. I want when you go to the website, you're enticed by what it's talking about, and you want to be on the website to learn. And to do that, I feel like I would have more control if I learned how to do HTML and CSS. So, for instance, that's something that I'm working on with these businesses. So I would be talking to you about that, or maybe things to help you with that in your business. So kind of, I kind of think it's like business hacks or business learning segment. And then after that, I would want to talk about some of the personal stuff, because after all, this is Age of Jeremy. I want to talk about the stuff that's going on in my life. If you follow me on Snapchat, which probably some of you might, if you're listening to this, but in September, I did a great Snapchat, I guess, kind of show throughout the month about building my vision board. So during the personal life segment on this podcast, I would talk about what's going on with my vision board, stuff that's going on with my wife. Me and my wife, we love animals. We have a hamster. We have 2 tortoises. We have a Maltipoo, and we just got a Havanese. So I would talk to you about cool stuff that's going on with them. And also, this is our very first house, and it's like the backyard's not done. Neither of the studio has stuff in it. The other room has couch in it that folds out to a bed. So it would be cool to talk to you about all the stuff that's going on in my life and stuff that I'm learning that I can share with you. So for instance, like, one of the things we want to do, we have a big Arizona room in the house, and I want to get a pool table in it. I want to get a Galaga arcade machine in it, and a sitting area, and then an upright piano. And what's sad about that is this Arizona room is that big. It will hold all this. It's huge. And so I think it'd be cool, like if I'm talking to you about this personal stuff that's going on in my life, like how I'm budgeting to plan for that. Because I don't want it to just you be listening to me ramble kind of like you are right now, but I want it to really provide skills and I guess I want it to teach you skills that you can do to be more successful in your life. And those would be the segments. So you would have a podcast award segment, stuff that's going on in social media in my life, what's going like a business hack section, and then a personal life hack section, I guess. And through those segments, that would be the entire show. And I would really want it to only be about 20 minutes. And as I say that, I'm looking over at the timer and I'm at about 21 minutes. But that would really be the entire show. And then what would be cool is if this gets going, or when this gets going and we have comments, maybe I can answer some of your questions on it and learn from you guys and give me feedback on things that would be better for you. Because this is really for you in the long run. But as I'm doing it right now, it's kind of for me because I'm kind of learning all of this with the podcasting, because I want to reach out to people, create new shows to get them on the podcast network. And to do that, I have to become the king of it. So it has to be like my whole life. It has to become an obsession of mine. And even though it doesn't specifically doesn't say it in that way in the You Must Believe Way of Life book, which is a John Vasquez book from JV Impacts. It doesn't say it exactly in that way, but when you're coming up with a goal and you're trying to do something, you need to read about it, watch YouTube videos about it, learn from mentors that are in that space and get knowledge about it so you can become the authority on it, so you can be better at it. And that's kind of that's why I'm doing this. Now, the last thing that I want to say is just a couple of things. At the beginning of the podcast, there's going to be like a punk band song. I just like that song. And it has a reference to alcoholism. And just to open up to everybody on the podcast, I was an alcoholic for a very long time. And I've been 3 years sober this last August. And it's the greatest accomplishment of my life. And I haven't smoked in 2 years also, which was in May of this year, was 2 years without smoking. And so the song has reference to that, and it's meaningful to me. If you don't like the opening song, leave a comment. I'll try to find something else. Maybe you think that it doesn't fit with what the podcast is about, because the podcast right now is really all over the place. But if you want something else, just let me know and I'll change it. But that's the reason why I have that. And then for the Age of Jeremy image, I chose to do a record and a tape and a microphone. I chose to do the tape mainly just because I really like cassette tapes. And it's really interesting. The band Brand New, I don't know if hopefully you've heard of them. They're a great band. They just put out a brand new album after I think like an 8-year hiatus, and it's a fantastic album. It's called Science. And they came to Arizona last year, and when I went and saw them, they like had a limited edition cassettes of their older CDs because the new album hadn't come out yet. It came out this year. And I just thought that was interesting. And then there's another band called At the Drive-In, which broke up, 17 years ago or something like that. They haven't released an album. And they came out with an album this year. And they had a limited, this year or last year, I think it was this year, but they had a limited edition cassette. So I really just wanted the cassette on the thumbnail. But then I started thinking about it, like there's a cassette. Let me put a record on there. Let me get a microphone on it. And then it kind of took on a whole new meaning for me. And that meaning was that all of this stuff changes. And sometimes it comes back around, but we look at it in a new light. And And when I started thinking about that more, it kind of reminded me of like the radio. So for instance, we have podcasts. There's lots of podcasts now, but and there's great things. I think it's Gimlet. Gimlet has a podcast that's like a play that they just do, and it reminded me of like on the radio when you used to have dang it, what was it? There was a show that was really popular, and then The Shadow, and The Shadow was a radio show, and when they would do the Shadow radio show, it was like live action, but it was all voice, and people would tune in and listen to that. And then, TV came along and destroyed the radio, and now the phone's coming along and destroying the television and the internet. Anyway, but we still now have a podcast, and Gimlet, they created this show, and it has David Schwimmer in it, and I can't remember the name of it, but just go to Gimlet and you'll find it. And on that, and it's just a story, and it's just them doing a story like in the radio days. But now we have a new platform to do it. So things are always changing, and that's what the record player and the cassette player and the old style microphone mean to me, is that things are always changing, but we can take things that were great about those times or those mediums, and we can take what was great about them and find a new way to share it with people. And that's what I think is exciting about podcasting and about where I hope Age of Radio goes. So that's the end of the first podcast, essentially. Leave some stuff in the comments. Go to Age of Radio on Facebook, and then Age of Radio Heads, which is a group, and share your stuff there. If you have any ideas for podcasts, let me know. We'll get you involved. We can do all of this virtually now with the way technology works, and we'd love to grow the podcast network with your podcast. And other than that, tell me if you like it. Tell me if you hate it. I can only get better if I know what's wrong, and I can only keep doing what is great if you tell me that as well. If you're listening to this in the morning, have a great afternoon. If you're listening to this in the afternoon, have a great evening. And if you're listening to this in the evening, have a great sleep if you sleep at night. And I will catch you on the flip side.